Before we get started, I'd like to say thank you for tuning in to our first ever podcast. Also, I feel that it may be important to disclose that there might be some inappropriate language that some might find to be offensive. So, if you have any small children in the room, I suggest that you have them look the other way. And with that, let's begin. I have worked a few jobs, all service-based, though not surprising considering 70% of all jobs in America are service-based jobs. At the ground level, i.e. minimum wage level, or rather the poverty level, it's needless to say that these jobs can be nothing far from hell. Around 43% of Americans make under the living wage of $15 an hour, and I, consequently, have fallen into that particular group of people, a particularly unfortunate statistic to be a part of. Currently, I work as a valet attendant at a casino in Indiana. I am choosing to keep the exact location undisclosed, though, seeing that there are only 2 major casinos in the entirety of the great state, I'd say you have a fairly good chance of guessing it right. And seeing that there is no great significance between the two, both being encompassed by cornfields, infectiously sad, and owned and operated by exactly the same company, I'm not sure why I'm really even making the effort. But, nevertheless, I feel that it's important. People of all types, shapes, colors, smells, you name it, go rolling through the casino, some quite literally, nearly every second of every day, mindlessly thumbing out the dumb drum of their daily routine, inattentively doling out the standard information, name, whether or not the window works, what to touch in the car, what not to touch, the jokes, or rather the one, will you wash it for me? And if they are handicap, because handicap is free. You see, anything free is not quite gold, but hell, they'll take it no matter what. Week old spam or even fresh spam, I'm not really sure what the difference is, as long as they do not have to drop a cent. Every penny is pinched at this casino, or rather pitched into the slots. Penny slots. Oh yes, even the gambling is boring in Indiana. The thing that gets me is that no matter how much is free, how well you do, or how well they do, the overall mood of the crowd is always stale chips. Like when one's salt cravings are met by chewy, bland chips that bend slightly before breaking in a very anticlimactic way. And even when you think, hey, let me give it another shot, actually try, like really try, to cheer these people up, they hate you for it. The service, free gifts, nothing can put these people in a better mood except maybe alcohol. I get that joke all the time as well when I offer a complimentary bottle of water. It's in the list of things people say or do that makes me want to throw myself to the ground, kicking and screaming, like a child in a store, or perhaps more accurately, a grown man throwing himself to the ground, kicking and screaming, because he feels he's in an all-too-real episode of The Twilight Zone, where the scenes play over and over. Then there are the cars themselves. I care less now about driving nice cars and more about not driving shitty ones. But that's mostly what I get. Shitty cars. It's not that the beat-up old Buicks that have no power steering, working headlights, and shake like yoo-hoos bother me all that much. It's the smells. Ass, B.O., and fast food at the same damn time. Those are the only, yet perfect words one could use to describe the fragrances that occupy most of the cars that I drive. And the trash? An aftermath of fast food cravings and Starbucks cups fill every cubic inch of the cars with a single hollow spot where the driver sits. It is sick, it is disgusting, greedy, and self-loathing. Self-loathing turns into loathing of others when one is unable to accept it. It's the casino's fault that they cannot pay rent, my fault that I work for the casino, and the world's fault because it did not notice their obvious awesomeness and has yet to make them ultimate ruler of the universe because, why not? I often stand watching them chew on their fingers, slumped over lifelessly as they stare out to the nothingness, thinking of what I can only imagine to be nothing. Literally nothing. They are utterly useless. Yes, utterly. They carry about as much worth as a leaking cup of sterile sperm, though even that's putting it modestly, for at least a cup of sterile sperm has yet, and never will, reach the point where it could possibly yield a negative net value, and has not yet sat whittling away our precious resources while returning hardly anything. it's just a cup of sterile sperm, for Christ's sakes. There are so many beautiful things in this plane of existence. Beautiful in gross or scary ways, beautiful in awesome ways, beautiful in ways that defy what we know and understand of the small space we occupy. The surface of Venus burning hot and angry, so hot and angry that one could be incinerated before hitting the surface, but not before the extreme air pressure would indubitably crush you to bits. A supernova, the most energetic event in the cosmos, ejecting matter at nearly the speed of light. The event horizon of a black hole as it stretches matter out atom by atom, and atoms stretched particle by particle. There are all these stunningly amazing objects and events that exist out there in the universe, and half of these stingy bastards won't even tip me a buck. So, what does all this tell me about the society in which I live? The world in which I inhabit? Well, the answer is a sharp, unequivocally sobering nothing. This tells me nothing, or close to it, about my world. It gives me little insight to the inner working of the reality of anything at all. For all the moments we witnessed are just that, moments. The viewing of a large, filthy man very desperately trying to escape the confines of his parked car is just the briefest moment into a single person's entire life, and an even briefer moment of humanity as a whole. In the end, it equates to little more than a single data point, amongst such a multitude of data points that any possible understanding of their message, any effort to decode their meaning would take far greater than a single lifetime. And yet we, individually, continue to base our entire understanding off of just a handful of these moments, data points on a remarkably incomplete graph, and then refer to them all as life experiences. Well, it's not hard to understand that the life experience of a postal worker, truck driver, or doctor gives little insight to the complexities of the extreme environment of Venus, the majesty of a supernova, or even the intense improbability, but unquestionable reality of something as spectacular as a black hole. For it's through a conscious effort that one must learn and understand these things. So why is it so hard for people to step from their rocks and proceed consciously into the diversity and intricacies of their own society? To actually learn a thing or two about how things truly work, and not just what's on the news, seeing that the news is infuriatingly incompetent at portraying any accurate depiction. Perhaps humanity is just far too dumb. Or maybe the answer is the result of something far more complicated. Everything we do as a whole is connected, a sort of superorganism that maintains fragile states. The purchase of a steak in Brazil could cause the extinction of a tree species in North America, and yet people do not take the time to understand these things, claiming nothing will change while ordering another. Thus, armed with a skill set and knowledge base that involves the ability to bus a table, seat a table, serve a table, prepare a meal, scrub dishes at a brisk pace, valet park a car in reverse at breakneck speeds with ultimate precision, a questionable and brief education in sociology, and an unquestionably extensive, though possibly fruitless, education in photography, I will connect the data to the moments, the life experience parts. I will embark on an endlessly complex journey that is, with no other assurance, endless. I will delve through topic after topic, and, hopefully, once reality has set in for some people, maybe just a few less will order that steak, or scowl at the fat chick for putting mustard on hers. I will learn you a few things, educate you, which takes me to my first topic, the single most important element of modern society, education. My name is Ryan Manning, and you are listening to As One, Our Society.
I mean, what are you going to do? I'm teaching 15-year-olds and they're illiterate. Like, that's a tough gap to get you ready to take that test. That's going to depend on the funding and show that I'm a good teacher and that you won when, so there's just a lot. There's just a lot with education, and education is where a lot of our societal issues just really intersect. And unfortunately, the people that get crushed in that intersection are the kids, and normally the kids that don't have anyone to speak up for them.
It is no surprise that the growth in affluence, the rise of the middle class, and the advancements in technologies coincides with the increase in education of the general populace. One could argue that education doesn't come without money. While there is no doubt about that, one could also argue that money doesn't come without education. And that's never been more true than it is today. The problem is that in America, the wealthiest country in the world, we have the largest inequality gap in our history. In the meantime, there is a widening gap in education amongst the different socioeconomic classes. In an era where success is so fervently intertwined with that education. This is a problem. Some estimates put child poverty at 22% in America. Some estimates are even higher. Can you see the picture that I'm painting for you? The future of any nation is its youth, and we, in America, have evolved into a society that carries such extreme expectations, but provides little help. Those in charge say they should take some accountability, while raping them of any chance to succeed. As you will hear, I have two stories for you. One is of a school that had failed, and then failed again, and the other is a school that had also failed, but succeeded, and then also sort of failed. The first story comes from this lady.
My name is Kate Hunger-Elliot, and I was a 2011 Teach for America Corps member.
Teach for America is, as far as I can tell, a well-intended organization that is serving a purpose that needs serving. But the issue I have with this program is that there is a need for it at all. It takes up-and-coming college students and graduates, many without any education experience, throws at them a book of do's and don'ts, and then ships them away to the furthest reaches of our country to have them do what others could not: teach. The places they are most often sent are not affluent areas, but rather the exact opposite. Places where the demand for teachers exceeds, with remarkable success, the supply for teachers. If such a thing is occurring at all, where we are failing in our society to produce a want and a desire to be a teacher, then we know, just a few moments in, that there is a serious issue with the education in America. Why is this happening? Well, there are a few reasons.
There's actually a lot of factors in why there's a need for teachers. It kind of depends on who you talk to. My personal opinion, and this is definitely political bias, but a lot of it has to do with over recent years, the teacher unions have been weakened. So when I was in Louisiana, for example, LSU, I believe my core year I was there, they only had maybe like 22 education graduates because everyone looked at education and they were like, you're not gonna make any money. Your benefits are getting cut. Like, yeah, you get summers off, but why would you do that when if you are smart, or if you are driven, or you like different things, like you should go and try to be a principal, or why don't you go and write curriculum, or like why would you settle for teaching?
I would like to mention that not everyone agrees with the idea that we need more unions. Some claim that they actually discourage people from wanting to be teachers, much in the same way that one child on the playground slide might say to the others, "I was here first." But she said something that mustn't be overlooked. And that's why would anyone want to settle for being a teacher? Even with an undersized brain, one has only to think briefly about this to understand the concerns. Arguably one of the most important jobs that exists today, and why in the world would anybody want to settle for it? The answer to this problem, I felt, was simple. We just need to pay teachers more.
With paying teachers more, I think practically goes into how we fund schools, and that's all in property taxes. So for example, in the state of Indiana, definitely Marion County, I think also within the state of Indiana, there has been a cap on property taxes. You can only be taxed, I think it's like 3%.
Actually, it's even lower. It's 1%.
That might be too high. That's the cap. It can never be raised more than that. So those property taxes go for schools, they go for public funds, they go for either your roads, they go for busing, they go for so many things that it's very much, it's a pie and everyone is taking a slice. And so there is naturally a very strict limit as to how much they can be funded, and then that kind of trickles down. I think you can think of a fair salary scale. I just don't know what that looks like, especially with the limits of the property tax cap.
So, naturally, there is a limit on the amount we can pay teachers. There are only a few wells, and those wells dry up very quickly, especially when those wells are being capped off and the funds shifted elsewhere, like to say small businesses that make a few $billions a year. To give some slack to the lawmakers of the beautiful state of Indiana, Kate said that the tax cap was reactionary to prevent white flight, to keep affluent families and their money right where they were. What is great about that is that even with the tax cap, white folks were still fleeing the city. So, funding for charter schools and magnet schools increased, pulling even more money from the already limited funds. Now, there is nothing inherently wrong with charter schools. The idea behind them is that they can be a better alternative to the public schools. But I have an issue when we take money from kids, period.
And IPS tried to counter that by creating the magnet schools. And again, part of that was the school funding, to try to say we really want to keep people here, don't pay an extra tax and drive your kid to Lawrence, there's an arts magnet school, there's Broad Ripple, things like that. If you look it up, you'll see that the magnet school funding, how it's shaken out is that the magnet schools get just a lot more funding than the regular IPS schools. So even within IPS, in my opinion, we've created a system of winners and losers. I think it's crazy that we're in a situation now where we have public reform champions partnering with suburban folks to try to get the per pupil spending up so that they can increase the charter schools. There are a lot of just crazy situations that we're in now, and a lot of it I think is because people forget that the overwhelming guiding function of education is for the betterment of students, and that is all around. That is social, that is emotional, that is physical, that is mental, that is educational. What the magnet schools are doing is they are taking the kids whose parents have the means and the ability to apply for a magnet school, to get into magnet school, and then drive their kid to a magnet school. You're getting them to magnet school and you're decreasing the community support around a regular high school, or even the magnet programs as well.
What she's actually saying here about decreasing the community is very important, and we will come back to that later. But the point I'm trying to make is this. Children in the public school system are being ran over so that the city can maintain the highest possible level of affluence. And instead of that wealth being dispersed in a manner that gives those who have the least some threat of a fighting chance, it is being funneled right back to where it came from. The fuckery is epic, to say the least. Kate gives what I believe to be the perfect metaphor for this situation. The Baptist and Bootleggers coalition that brought us the Prohibition.
So it was the Baptists who believed that alcohol was a sin. It was the bootleggers that wanted to make a lot of money if alcohol was illegal. So together, they combined political forces, both inadvertently and very much all of a sudden, the bootleggers started showing up to the Baptist rallies to vote for prohibition. So then booze was illegal. And it was one of the most infamous coalitions because it was both two very completely different, one super altruistic, one super self-serving, to literally change national politics, and were not a coalition for anything else except for prohibition, because one wanted to make money and one wanted to go to heaven.
So, what is the result of all this bootlegging? Well, in the case of Arlington, an inner-city IPS school, it was shut down.
I taught in urban Indianapolis and the Indianapolis core for the 2012-2013 school year at Arlington High School in downtown Indianapolis. Schools got taken over by law in the state of Indiana if they went 7 consecutive years as a failing school, so they earned an F rating. To earn an F rating, I believe you needed to have less than 55%, maybe 60% of your students pass the standardized tests. And in Indiana, that was the 8th grade ISTEP, and that was the 10th grade ECAs. The important thing to know is like literally no one ever thought it would come to that. Like there were zero structures in place at a state level for them to actually take over a school and to actually oversee it.
So what they do in these situations is they sell contracts to charter schools for millions of dollars.
So the contracts were worth millions of dollars, and they sold them to private charter school companies. The charter networks got paid to run the schools, and they also got administrative staff salaries. They got the normal federal funding. Like they got everything that they would need to turn the school around.
And in the case of Arlington, it was an Ed Power school called Tinley that took over.
When the school got turned around as well, what would happen is it became open enrollment. So normally public schools, you have a very firm boundary. You live in this square, you go to this school. So what happened was Arlington became open enrollment. So that meant that anyone could enroll in that school from across the city. That also meant that no one was required to go there anymore. So that normal square of kids that went to Arlington now were actually by default delegated elsewhere. They got bus routes elsewhere because they no longer had to go, so it became a choice school.
And considering the school funding is based on per pupil, every child that left that school was a significant blow financially to Arlington High School.
They only get the funding of the students that are actually enrolled on count days. Arlington went from about, I think it was like 1,500 students down to 400 for 7 through 12. So that led to, overburdening the other schools that, they had no idea who was coming in. This was never supposed to happen. There were no procedures in place. There was no giant IPS enrollment day where, hey, you used to go to Arlington. What school are you going to go to? Where are you sending your kid? It was all pretty much random. And so I heard at Washington, they just had quite literally hundreds of students that they didn't expect on day one. Because they should have gone to Arlington or another one of the takeover schools. They no longer had to. They just hopped on the bus to go to school, and that's where they ended up. At Arlington, we thought that we were going to have a whole bunch of, I think, like twice the number of students, but we only had half because they had the old year's rolls. And then there were a whole bunch of students that showed up that weren't on the roll that we then had to, set up with student profiles, things like that. And at Arlington, for the most part, it went pretty smoothly because we had fewer than expected. So we had staff galore. I had classrooms of like 10 students when I was at Arlington because we were just way overstaffed. And those first days, we were overstaffed as well. And, they had form schedules. Like every kid had a place to go, which was great. That was not the case at the other schools because they had hundreds more than they expected. And they weren't staffed for it. They didn't have, student information. Not to digress even more, but how student information is kept is it's on a whole bunch of different disparative systems, so they don't talk to each other. So it's also very difficult to make sure that you have the right kid on the right number in the right place. At Arlington, we actually had a student that we found out in December. He'd been there since August. He actually should have been in 7th grade, and we had him in 8th grade because he showed up and he said, I'm an 8th grader. And we said, okay. So, things like that happen. Good times. So anyways, I walked in. When Arlington was taken over, they fired everyone, every single person. So there were no administrators, no secretaries, no nurses, no teachers, no one. And they placed me as a 9th grade composition teacher, and I was the veteran teacher. There was one other teacher, 2 other teachers in the 7th through 12th building that had actually taught before. Everyone else is brand new. And pretty much everyone was Teach for America or TNTP, the New Teacher Project, which is basically the same as Teach for America. So they actually had never even gone through student teaching. So the administrators had never been administrators at the level that they were at. So our assistant principal had never been an assistant principal. Our deans had never been deans. So we were all kind of figuring it out together. So it was a pretty intense environment. So what Ed Power tried to do, and you could argue that they succeeded at this, is they wanted to change the culture. So their prevailing theme was that what had gone wrong at Arlington, wasn't the kids, it wasn't the parents, it was the culture of the school. And it had been a culture of failure. It had been one that was unsafe. We got told horror story after horror story of things that had happened. So they were going to come in and they were going to forcibly change the culture. That's really hard to do, and it can be viewed as very offensive, especially when you're that in your face about it. So when the kids showed up, they got uniforms that they had to wear, which they never had to wear before. They were provided them. They didn't have to go buy them, but they didn't fit them properly. I had one little girl that was maybe like 5'2", and she wore like a men's large shirt. When they walked in the door, there were very few entrances they could go in. They got metal detected. They had to take off their belt and shoes like the airport. Like, they were patted down. And a lot of that was to, make sure that they knew who was in charge. We had very draconian discipline systems that, again, was trying to change the culture. But the only discipline that we had was an out-of-school suspension. There was no in-school suspension. There were no detentions. There was nothing. So we had students that missed months of school in out-of-school suspensions, and not for major things, but for little things. So they really, really tried to forcibly just change the culture, which was intense. They also, Ed Power believes in single-sex education, so I taught classrooms of girls and I taught classrooms of boys. They believed in a culture in which the hallways were silent, so they wanted to have the classrooms of girls and the classrooms of boys, who never intermixed when they got to see each other in the hallway, be completely silent and walking in lines. You can guess how well that went. Not very great. So it was intense. They wanted drill sergeants. They wanted us to be pretty much in your face. They wanted it to be very, we are in charge and this is it. If you don't obey, like, get out. Tinley and Ed Power, they do out-of-school suspensions, and it's very no-nonsense, very strict. They have really great success rates, but they also have graduating classes of 15. And they start with 7th grade classes of like 80, and they graduate by 12th grade like 15. So they have huge attrition rates, and that's on purpose. So then when you bring that model into a public school, there are different rules, and there are different things that you have to consider, and they did not consider those things. The discipline system, in my mind, was doomed to fail, because they had one card, which was out-of-school suspension. So by November, when about 2/3 of the school has been out-of-school suspended, parents no longer view that as like, oh my God, my kid did something wrong. It's now, the school's out to get my kid. I don't think they're necessarily wrong on that. Arlington also had a very high special ed population. It was about 40 to 45% of students had an IEP. And Tinley typically deals with 4 to 5 kids that have an IEP. So they were not prepared to have the resources needed for that. So they also weren't prepared for some truancy resources that they needed as well. So like our social worker became a truancy officer by second semester. So there are just a lot of like logistical things that you don't really think about, and how much they impact the students that really did. So Arlington was pretty much, they tried to, within the span of a summer, go from the reputation of being kind of a free-for-all, like no one's in charge, all run by substitutes, to a completely draconian, like everyone falls in line, you're in straight silent lines, like you are falling in line, you are doing what people say, or you're out. And that's pretty much a night and day shift. And they try to do that instantly, and it didn't work. Frankly, it just didn't work. It's been returned back to IPS. After about year 2 or 3, Ed Power said that they needed more money, that they couldn't run in Arlington because they were not getting enough money to run it to the standard that they needed to run it to. The year that I was there, we ended with about, again, like I said, I think it was around like 400 some students, and I think it was 90% of them had an out-of-school suspension on their record, at least one. Growth models, I think there was a growth in the state testing. My year wasn't tested, so I just know what my students did based on the reading level tests that we gave them, and they grew. There was some academic growth, but nowhere near hitting the metric that they needed. It was still enough school after year 1 and year 2, I believe, and then it got returned back to IPS.
So it seems to me, that the issue is obvious, that we don't have enough funding for these schools, and because of that, we don't have enough teachers. And so I'm like, so all we need is more teachers, right? And she's like,
Honestly, probably not.
Honestly, probably not.
I spent 14 years over on the near west side working at George Washington Community High School. I went in when the neighborhood reopened it with IUPUI's help and the help of a lot of partners, with the idea that we would encourage partnerships and parent engagement to really help the children to do a better, to graduate from high school and go to college. Those were the keys that we constantly were focused on. We want to help these kids to graduate from high school and go to college. That's what the parents said they wanted. And most of them probably didn't know what either one of those things mean.
Our next story takes us to George Washington High School. Much like Arlington, it too failed, but instead of having a state takeover, they actually shut the school down. Now, this happened a few years before Arlington, but the way that they reopened the school, well, it's a bit different than the way they handled the Arlington situation. And it was with the help of this man.
I'm Jim Grimm. I am the Director of University Community School Partnerships here at IUPUI. And what that means is I work with schools in the targeted areas of the near west side and the near east side and essentially neighborhoods around the campus and helping to create community and family engagement with our schools.
Community and family engagement with our schools. What this means is that they turn George Washington High School into what is known as a community school.
A community school is a strategy that organizes essentially neighborhood supports for students and their families, strengthening the families in the neighborhood. That's really important because one of the things that we know is that in a school, the quality of the teacher is really important. There's no question about that. I mean, absolutely, a teacher has to know their stuff, and they have to be able to relate to children and to be able to teach. And not everybody can do that. That's hard. People think just because they went to school they can. But a huge part of this equation is outside of the school. All of those societal factors that children bring with them when they come into the school, that their families bring with them when they come into the school. The culture stuff. You know, the reason why we do need to have cultural understanding. That's equally important, actually probably more important these days because we have such a high rate of poverty with our children in our country, which is embarrassing.
The school has to become the main source of food, the main source of medical care, the main source of emotional support, and then education. And in the hierarchy of needs, education is not at the bottom. So,
I mean, we've all experienced these kinds of things, but when you experience that, plus the house, plus the children, plus plus have challenges with health, that adds up. And that scaffolds into huge issues. And a child who has a toothache isn't going to do very well on ISTEP. I'm trying to get people to understand because we work in silos. I think it's almost ingrained in us. And so what we're trying to do is break down those silos so that we can collaborate and spread out resources so that everybody can get access to the things that they need. Every child needs this and every child needs this, and maybe mom and dad can give it, or maybe it's going to have to come from the Marion County Health Department or the IU School of Dentistry, depending on where we are in our community with the resources we have. And so that's why in a community school you will have say the School of Dentistry at the table where they bring the mobile dental bus over twice a year to help the kids. Or you have the Indy Learning Center, and you have college student tutors who come in and help the children with their language arts and math, or their reading. Read Up from the United Way of Central Indiana, where they have corporate volunteers from throughout the city, mostly corporate, there's also others, but say like from Eli Lilly Company, where they come in and twice a week they read with kids. They help because they're trying to help the children to do better. A lot of times these are probably kids whose parents don't have the opportunity to read to them as much as affluent parents probably do.
you can predict how well a child will read, not by how many hours or minutes that they're read to as a child, but just how many number of books are in the house. And that's a clear statement of, if you are well-to-do, if you can afford books, your kid is probably going to read better than a student that might get read to more that doesn't have books in the house. And that's clearly saying because of stable household, not stable household.
This was a recurring theme whenever I talked to both Kate and Jim, that these kids need a place that provides more than just education. They need a place that provides all the things that many of us assume are provided at home. A lot of these kids, the only meal they get is at school. Now, the way that George Washington also handled its disciplines was vastly different than Arlington's.
You invite the parents and the service providers and the neighborhood leaders and the faith-based organizations, yes, even churches, because, people get, oh, you can't have that because, that's separation of church and state. We're not talking about preaching, the gospel. What we're talking about is, some of our faith-based organizations are the most enduring partnerships for schools, because they don't go anywhere, they're always there, that once they commit to working with the school and they come in and they can help children with mentoring and tutoring and character education and art and after school experiences, things that we need to help enrich children's lives and to help children learn how to live. I think one of the mistakes we've made over the years, you hear all of this business about school to prison pipeline. Well, the reason why is because we stopped, we started punishing kids, thinking of punishment rather than learning. And so one of the things like the Indianapolis Public Schools is doing that I'm really proud of is the fact that they're switching all of that. And even though it's really tough and difficult because it can be very problematic and it's extremely labor intensive, but instead of just automatically saying, okay, you did this so you get these many days out, or you did this so you're expelled, they're looking at a more holistic approach where they're taking, say, behavior incidents and helping the children to learn how to deal with their emotions and their actions in something called PBIS. And what it really is it's actually the right way to go. It's where you're instead of punishing, you actually help people learn from mistakes. Well, what a great idea, because I can remember as a child, I did things because I didn't realize I wasn't supposed to. Well, if someone never told me I wasn't supposed to, if I just got punished for it, I might not have known what to do the next time. I remember in my first day of kindergarten, literally the first day, I didn't know what a bell meant when it rang. I didn't know what it meant. If you're out for recess and the bell rings, you have to go inside. And I got in big trouble because I didn't go inside when the bell rang. Well, I thought, just because everybody else went in, I don't need to. I'm a little independent, but I really didn't. I really did not know what that bell meant. And when everyone went inside, I don't know, I just thought, well, they must be done playing. I'm not done. So it would have been really helpful for my teacher to explain to me what that meant. I mean, I caught on later, but it really would have been helpful for my teacher to set me down and help me to think through what my actions might be the next time a bell rings. And the same thing with children who are emotionally distraught or going through some kind of trauma. And we have a lot of kids in trauma or in traumatic situations, I'll call it, unfortunately, today in our country. And to help them to understand that instead of blowing up and striking out, that there are other ways to express themselves to get what they want or what they need. And that's what PBIS is, except it's really labor intensive because they do things like peer mediation and circles, group circles, and that kind of thing, those kinds of things. But that's the best way for kids to learn, is to really, help them learn and teach them instead of just punishing them. That's the mistake we made along the way. We just started, you do this, you get that. You do this, you get that. We messed up along the way.
It really is shocking. The idea that we could actually teach a generation rather than persecute them. The issue is that we, long ago, decided that any infraction must be met with swift justice. However, maybe it is better to feed a dog rather than beat it. Is that metaphor too much? How about this? Maybe we should teach our kids how to deal with situations rather than try to suppress their behavior. Or maybe those in charge need to be put in time out, so that they may reflect on what it is they have done. Chances are they will have no idea what the hell is going on. What an interesting twist of fate that might be. With the help of an entire community, the kids were actually able to do quite well, as Jim explains.
Like I said, we kept on this notion that we wanted kids to graduate from high school and go to college. So after the first 6 years, then the first kids started graduating from high school, and immediately we saw results. Immediately when the kids were taking I-STEP, it was I-STEP for the first time, they were like doing really outperforming the students in the other IPS schools. I would like to say they were doing outstanding, but the fact is they weren't. I mean, they were doing better than the other kids. They weren't doing as well as we would have liked. However, when they actually graduated, we got to a point while I was there where 77% of the kids were graduating from high school within 4 years. And to me, it's in a neighborhood where high school graduation just wasn't even a priority. It really wasn't until they lost their high school and these parents decided, wow, maybe we should make education a priority around here. They're going to take it away from us if we don't, because literally that's what happened. And then they said, and we want them to go to college because they thought, they knew in the future our kids are going to need some kind of post-secondary education. And I think that's what they really meant. In 2000, the kids who graduated in 2010, 2011, 2012, and 2013, 69% of them actually went to college. They actually not just enrolled, but showed up. In June of 2014, the last time that we checked, 63% of those high school graduates from those 4 years were still in school, or they had finished their course of study. So to me, and at that time, I think just under, or maybe even now, just under 10% of the residents aged 25 and older have any kind of post-high school certification. So obviously, the community school involvement helped to change the entire mindset, even though the truth of the matter is the mindset was there first. The community school provided them with a framework to achieve it, because it was the parents who said, we want our kids to graduate from high school and go to college. The parents and the grandparents. So that was that was a huge thing where I saw something. Now, what you will have critics say is, oh, well, their I-STEP scores are horrible, or this or that. Well, yeah, you can, but what we were looking at the whole time was high school graduation and post-secondary education.
So is this the solution? Is this the answer to all the questions? And I don't mean just education. I mean everything, like everything in society. Is this the answer? Is the model in which George Washington High School is following, can this solve crime, poverty, the lack of cultural understanding, everything, every single thing? Because like I said before, education is the key to solving all sociological problems. And Jim says
it can be a solution. Yeah, I think it can be a solution.
Awesome. We just found the solution to everything in the entire world. We're going to go out and we're going to tell everybody that this right here is the holy grail of everything. And we're going to change the entire world in our very first podcast. We were very excited about this until
IPS has scheduled a second parent meeting. When I spoke to parents earlier today, they said there are some serious issues happening at this high school.
We've seen fights, a lot of more fights, just been out of control. They will try to jump her after school.
The large group of kids broke her daughter's nose. She wants justice.
That's not acceptable behavior for anybody in school.
So, it may seem that George Washington High School is not the success story that I had so desperately longed for it to be. The mechanics of our school reform laid waste to any possibility of a bright future for this school, for the measures in which we gauge school success remains fundamentally flawed. The measures do not gauge the overall well-being of a child or whether the school is providing the comforts that many live without. Instead, schools are forced, with depleting funds, to jam down the throats of every child the importance of the Pythagorean theorem, what a noun is, or whatever else might be on the state-issued test. Everything otherwise is pushed aside. So, when George Washington High School failed in too many categories for too many years, it was, as you might say, reformed. In the eyes of the state, the administrative staff was failing to provide its students with the ever-important ability to take a test. And thus, the administrative staff was relieved of its duty and replaced by a completely fresh and inexperienced staff because that was totally the issue. George Washington soon began to slip under the new management and began a process of tearing through the minds, bodies, and souls of its principals year after year. And let's not forget that when Arlington was reformed, there was a sudden influx of new students to George Washington High School. The problem, though, is much more simple than taxes, state testing, and the lack of teachers. Jim finished our interview off by saying that one must not forget that the greatest challenge for education is poverty. Well, that kind of makes it a fuck all, a catch-22, because the only way out of poverty is education. I understand that fame and fortune is a way out, but the idea is that poverty is a societal issue, and the only way to rid ourselves of this is through education. Fame and fortune, not so much. So, when I remind you that 22% of our kids live in poverty, it should come with some level of alarm. Our future is being forced to fight for its life, to pull itself up with a crumbling ladder while our past stands on its head, looking down and saying, they should take some accountability. What is the ultimate conclusion of all this? If the answer seems ambiguous, that's because it is. Though, what one can gather, with some creative thought, is that there is a problem and that problem needs solving. See, education is the gateway into a better future. Just simply knowing stuff will drive the prosperity of any individual. And without prosperity, you have poverty. Subsequently, if we educate our children, they may prosper, and then, as a society, we may overcome poverty. The hard part is that before we can even get to educating our children, we must first overcome poverty.